Batu, Barada, Nikto.
You must remember those words.
Gordon's alive.
You know what the Turing test is?
I know Kung Fu.
Dead or alive, you are coming with me.
My God, it's full of stars.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Stories Out of Time and Space. I'm your regular host, Scott Weatherly, and as always, I'm joined by my intergalactic robotic friend, Julian Darius. Julian, how are you doing? You okay?
Yeah, I'm doing well. How are you doing?
I'm good, thanks. I'm good, yeah. I'm really glad we got to do this pick we're doing today. We do animation every now and then. It's sort of try and sort of include one each season. And today's episode, we are doing The Iron Giant from 1999, which is based on I forget the name of the book now. It's basically The Iron Giant is the book.
The Iron Man.
The Iron
by
Man.
Ted Hughes.
Yeah, which has the same names. Hogarth is the name of the boy in it, but the book is more fantastical. It includes a dragon that sort of takes up the whole of Australia and a battle for the sort of humanity of the human race. This is slightly smaller. This is a 50s science fiction kind of film animation. And it has a reputation, this film, as it sort of underplayed or underperformed a little bit at the cinemas at the time, but is now regarded as, is very highly regarded, I think, as a bit of a cult following, and also as one of those sort of the last really good 2D animation films before everything sort of turned to computer animation. But what are your sort of initial thoughts then on The Iron Giant?
Well, I think that I always heard of this as a kind of classic. I did not see this in theaters. I don't really remember this coming out. But I have always heard in the context of what an amazing movie, what a classic movie, but I never had that connection at the moment to it, right? And I have seen it, I've seen all of it in fragments. I've never seen it directly from start to finish until watching it for this show. And I have to say that I am sort of not charmed.
Oh, okay.
I find it lesser than the sum of its parts. I'm a big fan of the Bumblebee movie, which people, obviously it has some other themes. You're designed for war, but you fall in love with, or somebody has a wonderful experience with you, right? But I don't know. I love the animation style. There's a lot I like about this, but I just mostly am not charmed by it. And I think it has to be charming or it doesn't work.
Oh, okay. Interesting. See, I am charmed by this film.
Okay.
Very much
Good.
so.
We finally found something this season where we can disagree.
Yeah. No, I do have. This came in 99. I was 17, turning 18 in 99. So I wasn't a kid. I know of people 10 years my sort of junior that are very much taken with this film, and it forms a very sort of a large part of their childhood and their sort of animation journey, where sort of like I think those to me, those early 90s films, those early 90s Disney films, some of the Don Bluth films of the 80s are those sorts of films for me. But I love this film. I do really enjoy this film. I think this film is fantastic. I do find it charming. I miss this kind of animation. I honestly miss 2D animation in I think it's really high quality. But there's just something so sort of simple about this film. Is a sort of not even like it's a morality tale, but it's relatively straightforward. It's a small, sort of quite concise sort of film. And if you were to make this as a live action now, it would be Michael Bay Transformers, kind of thing. In the sort of the scale that they were trying to do. So I don't know. This is something about this I do find incredibly charming. And sort of, but and also this tapping into these 50s ideas of the fear of the bomb and something alien or external coming to Earth, and this idea of acceptance. Like it all kind of works for me, actually, as a piece. And I think, yeah, there's especially there's some interesting things, like it's knowingly sort of throwing in there, like when the kids are in the classroom and they're watching a duck and cover video, and then later on it's sort of acknowledged when the ship
by
launches,
the military, right?
Like, yeah, it's like the guy said, "Oh, it's duck and cover," and he's like, "We're dead." Like the general's like, "Oh no, we're all gonna die." Like I like that it's got those sorts of messages sent in, and sort of I think it's yeah, there's some good stuff in there.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with that, but I do think the duck and cover video, like you see the bombs falling, and the kid who's ducked and covered is left like
In a
on a
crater.
little, yeah, well, in a gigantic crater that he is somehow sort of, and it's so obviously like a satire of it
Yeah.
that it's so over the top that to then call back to that and have the military guys say, "Oh yeah, of course we can't, survive," seems like, yeah, we already know that, or we didn't get the joke. So even that doesn't work for me.
Oh, okay. See, I think as a kid, I think it works for kids because it is it's a silly video that when they watch it. But then the generals to be like, no, we all know, like, it's almost like that. I think it's that the idea to me is not just the video, but this idea of like, we're going to play this to kids, we're going to pander to kids, but we all know the ridiculousness of that concept, and we're going to acknowledge it. But there's
you know
also,
what I'm saying? Like I feel like I like the
oh yeah,
original duck and cover videos, like, but they
yeah,
depict you surviving.
yes,
This is clearly a parody of that. I mean, I don't know.
No, yeah, that's what you're saying. But what about let's talk about sort of the relationship then. You mentioned Bumblebee as a sort of a parallel. That's an interesting idea. But the idea of Hogarth and his relationship with, the robot, the Iron Giant, because I mean this is a story that's been told 100 times, isn't it? Sort of like it is E.T. This is unfortunately Mac and Me. It's Bumblebee. It's but it's that thing, like kid finds thing is alien or sort of destructive, and then they sort of form a relationship. Like that's been played, but like, what are your thoughts on this sort of thing of the Iron Giant?
I mean, I guess I am not shocked. I think you're exactly right to pinpoint that any one of these stories depends on E.T. and Elliot's relationship, right?
Yeah.
Charlie and Bumblebee. And this is such a quintessential, I mean, this movie has become sort of the go-to reference point for that, even more than E.T. At least in my circles or what I read. And so, for me, I found myself very disappointed revisiting this and thinking, first of all, I don't buy or care about his situation. None of the characters around him do I find convincing or interesting, very much at all. He just seems like a sort of very cardboard kind of character. I don't know why I'm supposed to care about him. I mean, I like the Iron Giant saying, "I'm not a gun." I mean, I like that. I do think that the last 20 minutes, 30 minutes of the movie are pretty solid.
Yeah.
I've got some problems with them, but they're pretty solid. But then I think, like, why did I watch this for an hour?
Right. I know what you mean. And just to go back to something you said about the characters, that is something that I find, I think does stand out. Hogarth, other than having a silly name, but it's the name of the boy in the book, is supposed to be sort of an outcast. He's supposed to be he's supposed to be slightly bullied. He's supposed to be a bit sort of whatever. But I'm not sure why. As a character, like throughout the film, I'm a little bit like, oh, he gets picked on, but why? Like he's not nerdy enough to be a nerd, or weird enough to be ostracized. Like it's just sort of like they just seem to have chosen him as to be the outcast, and so there's never a reason as to why he seems to be the one. And sort of it's slightly alluded to that he's into science fiction and like genre stuff, but like it's never,
Well, he
like
shows his comics, right? Because there's the whole thing with the Iron Giant wanting to be Superman.
yeah, exactly. It shows that, but how is that separating him from the other groups of kids? Like, he's got comics. Well, he's a kid in the 50s. Like, I'm sure that's supposed to
The
be
50s. Yeah.
Yeah, so it's supposed to be like at no point is that they also sort of suggest he's smarter than the kids, and he goes, "Well, no, I'm not smarter. I just do the homework." Like, I agree that Hogarth needs to be more awkward and have something that sort of like others him to the other kids, even if like he's from a single parent family. All right. Is that what it is? Like, is it that society has sort of like shunned him and his mum because they are a single parent family? Not really. Everyone seems to get on with his mum at the diner.
Right.
So I'm like, okay, so it's
Right.
not that. So and then you've got this character, the Dean Copland, played by Harry Connick Jr., who runs who's an artist, sort of like running the scrap metal yard. I'm like, cool. I can see what he's ostracized by this small town. He's weird. He's beatnik and this other stuff. So I now need a reason as to why he is the reason as to why Hogarth is able to make a connection with this Iron Giant and Dean. I need that, and I think that is one of the problems I do have with this film. Is I think Hogarth as a character is kind of flat. He's fun in a cartoony kind of way. Other than that, like, there's nothing there for me to say. It's almost like they didn't want to alienate him from the kids that were going to see the film. But you sort of need to, I think, in order to, to be ostracized. It doesn't work, and that's part of the problem, I think, as to why this is this. So I agree with that sort of element of that character.
Well, and you brought up the comics, like, there's a lot that sort of places this in the 50s and wants to get credit for that 50s nostalgia. But really, that experience of being a comic nerd and not fitting in is really much more an 80s experience, right?
Yeah.
It's even more 80s than it is 90s when this film came out. So, there are ways in which this is not, really, a 1950s depiction, and like you said, with a single mother, and other ways in which it's very much of its time, in ways that I don't know that it's in control of. But that's not for me a huge objection. But I mean, I know what you're saying, and I agree with it that the Hogarth is not really. Maybe he has to be generic enough for them to appeal to the average moviegoer, but he's too generic.
Yes.
Yeah. The other thing that another thing I want to point out is that I didn't remember that this was a silly comedy. And like, this is what we remember from it is the story of a boy and his robot, right? Like a boy and his dog. Okay, as a boy and his robot, that's what sticks with us in memory, and that's why it's lauded. And then I'm watching this and I'm like, how the hell do you capture a squirrel? Like, I love squirrels. Unless a squirrel is rabid, you are and is sick, you are not capturing a squirrel. How do you have it in your box?
And if it's sick and got rabies, you don't want to catch it. So
yeah, exactly. And that's a totally different scene in the diner then.
Yeah.
And so it's sneaking up the leg, and then the guy exposes himself to get the at least to his underwear, to get the squirrel out. None of this works. Nothing.
Oh, really?
I didn't laugh once in this movie. None of it works. I mean, I think that's just
where the difference is.
That scene is just off.
Oh, to me, it works. Now, I hadn't thought about capturing squirrels. Like, it was never something I wanted to do as a kid. Well, because I just don't think you're fast enough. Even like you and I have both had dogs, And I know that a dog will sometimes go like squirrel and run. Those things
Right.
are fast. Like they're up a
Yeah,
tree.
the dog does not capture the squirrel.
No. Not those things are fast. And so I get that. So that's why I've seen this idea of like kids with frogs or toads because they're a lot slower and that sort of thing. But that whole thing when it goes up Dean's leg and he's not wanting to sort of like drop Hogarth in it and be like no I get you kid like I've got your back. But then when he's sort of like, no, it's too far, and he stands up, I thought it was funny when he absolutely, but he doesn't just do it. It's not like Eddie Murphy kind of sort of humor would have been just instant exposure. It's the fact he stands up and apologizes. He's like, I'm really sorry, I'm going to do, but like, I'm gonna have to do this. I thought, I chuckled.
That
I'm fine.
really
with this.
confused and bothered me. I was really confused and bothered by that because he apologizes, and it's clear to me that he like, what are you apologizing for? Are you apologizing for exposing yourself to your underwear? I mean, if the squirrel is clawing you and you're desperate to get this out, you're not going to have time to apologize.
No, but
what he's really apologizing for is the chaos that's about to ensue as the squirrel runs around and everything goes crazy. Okay, well, the squirrel's already, like, how do you know that that's about to happen?
Well, I think he's apologizing for both. He's like, look, I'm about to do something and I'm not sure what's going to happen and I'm sorry, but I've got to do this. Like, I took it as like, that bit kind of works for me where it's like, I've got to do this. And it's an animated comedy film. I'm not thinking about it clawing away. It's just there's an uncomfortableness in his trousers because he's got a squirrel in there. I'm kind of sort of giving it that. One of the things I would say is I still take this as like a kid's film. Like I'm coming out and going, oh, the humor is going to be certain. There's certain things in the humor that's going to be puerile or sort of like down
bathroom humor.
Yeah, there's going to be those sort of things
that we do get.
And all that, and I'm completely fine. And personally, part of it sort of still works for me because I have got that sort of immature sort of humor. That's fine. But there's even jokes like the when he is at the scrapyard and he's using the Iron Giant to, he's holding like a Cadillac, like a car, and he's got the helmet on, and the giant just spins around, and it's too fast, and Hogarth, the helmet comes off, and he's like, coming into land. It's not like belly laugh kind of funny, but like I'm smiling throughout this sort of thing. I think it's quite good fun. In that sense, if I'm going like that, this is exactly what I would do. Like if I find I had a massive robot, like if I'd have been a kid, I'm sort of going, I can see the appeal of doing these things. Like he's not thinking like, oh, I can do these great big things. He's like, cool, I've got myself a walk-in fairground ride.
Yeah, see, I like that idea. I don't think it's well done. I think that, first of all, there should be the scene where he's like, you could milk that a little and set it up better, where he's talking to the Iron Giant and he's like, see, I've got a different idea. What I want you to do is, and then you sort of cut and he's being spun around. As it is, I find myself just thinking like, how many G's are you pushing? You're going to black out. I find myself thinking about all that stuff that I'm not supposed to think about.
Exactly. Okay, that's what I'm saying. So you're sort of going through, you're sort of stuck thinking in the practicalities of it.
The squirrel's clawing his leg, right? Like, he's holding it. I mean, he's in pain. You see him in pain and holding it in. I mean, you see him, the kid being spun around in the car. And, it goes on. And I'm just thinking, he loses like his helmet or and I'm thinking, right, you have now blacked out. This is not, I'm worried, is the Iron Giant going to drop you and fling you because he's not really together yet? I don't know. I'm not charmed, and I don't kind of buy, and I don't hate this movie, but I don't buy the tone. The tone doesn't quite sit with me. It never feels like it knows the tone that it's going for.
Okay. I see what you're saying. I can see what you're saying because I think sometimes the humor is slightly misplaced. And timed is interesting. Like, again, it sort of goes for things. And I wonder if because we've had a lot of things since, does it play differently? Because again, that when he is the character, I'll make 2 points. The character of Kent Manley he's the sort of the FBI agent or whatever that comes
Mm.
into town and stuff. And again, I love the voice actor that does it. I'm a fan of. I think I've seen him, Christopher McDonald. I've seen him in a number of
Mm.
things, and he's a great character actor and stuff. And I kind of like him in this, but there's that thing of sort of he lurches at sometimes into too much into sort of like manic sort of behavior. You know, he's sort of he's a G man. He's supposed to have it together, be cool, calm, and collected. That idea of the sort of the J. Edgar Hoover idea of the sort of professional lawman, that sort of thing. But then he lurches into sort of conspiracy theory and crazy a little too quickly at times, and so I do find that a bit sort of like grating. You know, it should take more to push him over the edge to sort of to believe that there's a giant robot. But he leans into it and becomes like, you know, becomes the crazy one a little too quickly. I like the fact he's a coward, and all the other stuff like with him later on. I think it sort of works as he. I like it when he moves in, becomes the lodger, and he's sort of like stalking Hogarth and stuff. Like I find all that kind of funny. That stuff all sort of works for me. But it sort of parts this film. I mean, this film's what? How long is it?
An hour and a half.
Yeah, 1 hour 26. And so if it's so there are sections, there's character development that sort of is rushed at the beginning of the film so they can get to other parts down the line. And I do think, like, you know, I'm not saying I want it longer because I don't mind a film being an hour and a half, but like, I don't know, just sort of move some things slightly around or something.
Yeah, I mean, I felt this was a lot longer than it needed to be. And I watched the director's cut, which has about 2 minutes of additional footage, including one of the sequences that I like the most, which is a dream sequence in which the Iron Giant dreams, and his dreams are broadcast on the telly of the junkyard. And so you see his origin.
Yeah, I've never seen this. I've not seen this at all. I knew of them, but I've never seen them.
Well, apparently this was storyboarded for the original and then abandoned for cost reasons. But it's very much Terminator, right? Like he's clearly from an apocalyptic future and has been transported back in time. We don't know how, right?
So he is from the future. He's not from space.
Yeah. Well, maybe he's from some space planet where this happened. That's very human, right? But
right.
I mean, there are a bunch of Iron Giants, and they're all clearly, you know, war machines, you know, and it's very Terminator-like footage, right?
Yeah.
So it could be the future, it could be an alien planet.
That's interesting to say that, because in the book, it's very much from outer space. It is an alien Iron Man. However, what's weird is I was looking for connections with other things, and so I listened to the lyrics of Black Sabbath's Iron Man, and I was listening to that and thinking, like, because I love that song, and again, it's one of those where sort of like I know everyone wants it for, you know, it should have been used for Iron Man in the MCU and stuff, and I'm like, yeah. You need to listen to the lyrics of that song. It's not a good song. Like, it's not a positive song. So I went back and I listened to it, really listened to it and read the lyrics. And that is about a man who is sent to the future and eventually comes back to the future. And in doing so is turned to iron. And when he tries to sort of like tell people about the awfulness of the future and what we could do to prevent it, he is ignored and cast aside and other stuff, and so he takes revenge on the people and becomes the catalyst for that terrible future. And so when you're saying about this thing coming from the future and stuff, I'm like, oh wow, this is closer to closer to the Black Sabbath song than the original. Book.
I do think he's supposed to be an alien because you start with it crashing, you know, off Maine and everything, and this weird sequence that with the ship that you know is barely referenced later. I mean, it's not important. I mean, I think this movie's got problems. But I mean, I do think he's supposed to be an alien. but the imagery is all of, I mean, it seems straight out of Terminator to me.
Right. Cool.
And it's cool. I mean, I like the idea of he's dreaming and it somehow takes over the television broadcast. I mean, it doesn't really make sense, but it's interesting. And the beatnik is kind of staring at the TV, kind of wondering what he's seeing, and then doesn't really do anything because it can't affect the film.
Yeah,
because it's original to the film.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, that's the thing, and it comes up, doesn't it? This idea of his origin is obviously remains mysterious, but he has a purpose. Because, like I say, when Hogarth jumps out and he's got that gun that I used to love those. You'd pull the trigger, something would spin around, it crackle and sort of cause an effect and all that sort of stuff. And the Iron Giant sort of goes into it. Made me think of Johnny Five from Short Circuit. The sort of the eyes.
We have to do like an '80s block someday, and because that's not going to come up in any other context.
No. And yeah, so then he fires his eye beams and stuff, and then you sort of see that he is built to be. At first, you think it's just the eye beams, and then later on, you realize it's a full on he is built for war. He is a war machine. Like he is a gun, a big weapon. But there's this idea of sort of choosing what you do, how you define yourself and stuff. And I like all that stuff at the end.
Yeah, I like that stuff at the end too. But I mean, let's be, first of all, he totally transforms into a war machine, in the climactic sequence. I mean, he does not look the same. I don't know where these parts come from. That's fine, whatever. But again, to go back to this issue of tone for me, and again, I don't hate this movie. I mean, this is not a bad movie. I love the style. I love animation. It's clearly kind of harkening back to like the 50 style and Fleischer, and it reminds me at times very much of Kyle Baker's work, who's an amazing artist and a cool guy from my experience. But I really dig the look and feel of this. I love the ideas of it, but the tone bugs me. And even in that sequence, like, he is attempting to kill Hogarth. He attempts to blast him twice. The beatnik is right to be protective.
Oh,
right?
yeah. I agree. Yeah, I'm not. Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, I just it seems a little serious for a movie with a squirrel in a box, that's running, gobbledygoo is running around the cafe. I don't know.
I think the thing is, it's. I mean, this is the thing with. I was just having a look. We went through a period around this time, which I want to get into, of sci-fi animation, and this film sort of is one of the things that sort of kicked it off. But that thing of tone is a balance, isn't it? They're looking to gain a balance between the comedy, that sort of like a boy and his robot comedy, which, as you sort of alluded to, is sort of like been done a number of times, and they want to have this sort of like message that about they're trying to get a lot of things in there. Obviously, it's set in the 50s because of the Cold War. This idea of sort of how we choose to engage with new things that we find, aliens or whatever, but then also sort of how you manage to deal with yourself. Or just because you are built to be something doesn't mean you have to be that thing. And so I get all that. It's trying to level those messages, and I think, like you say, sometimes it's sort of you can easily break this film into sections and go, oh, that's the fun montage, that's got the sky wheeling car, it's got the scene with them jumping into the lake, it's got this, it's got that, like that's the fun section. That section ends when he sort of like they get shot at the Iron Giant shoots at Hogarth, and then we start getting into the sort of the more serious thing of we're gonna shift. And as you say, not only does it shift story point, it shifts tone as well, and sort of that sort of part of the problem. I think, like, you're right. I can see what you're saying, I think to me it blends easier. Like I'm taken along with it enough that it's that thing. However, one film that I ran this that ran parallel to this in my head was a Disney film that came out in 2002, and that's Lilo and Stitch, which is a film I adore. I absolutely love that film. But where the Iron Giant has got a mysterious beginning and all this other stuff, and it ends up being you have this relationship with Hogarth, and you say it's not how sure how to balance the comedy. Lilo and Stitch knows that it's a comedy film. Like it knows what it's doing. I mean, Stitch is a creature, biological creature designed to destroy things. That's his entire purpose. And then it becomes about family, and it becomes a bit schmaltzy, but like throughout, it's got that wacky comedy. And this is one of the things I think Disney's always been able to do is balance that schmaltz with comedy to then get heart. Like it creates an element of heart. Now, Lilo and Stitch isn't their most successful film, but I do think it's a fantastic film. And that is more successful in having this thing. So when it comes to the end, in a similar way of you have these skills for destruction, but you need to use them for good, works better for me in Lilo and Stitch than it does in Iron Giant. Now, Iron Giant I like because of the sacrifice that's made at the end. But I do feel that Lilo and Stitch blends it in a better way than this film. I didn't think I was going to make that comparison on the podcast, but there you go.
No, that's fair. And I hear good things. I have not seen the film. I saw
it's
the
set
porn
in Hawaii,
parody, so I figure it's the same. No, I know, right? I mean, like I should, right? I live in Hawaii and adore Hawaii to a ridiculous degree. But which you feel the same way about Britain.
Yeah.
I'm teasing. I just realize how I have not mostly lived in Hawaii my entire life, and it's rare to live in a place you really do love. But I mean, I think about the Bumblebee movie, and I think that it does a better job for me of selling the relationship between the main character and the alien robot, right? And I mean, there are a lot of reasons for that. Curiously, I have more attachment to like the Iron Giant as depicted in Ready Player One than I do in the actual Iron Giant movie. I mean, it's almost like the Iron Giant works better in nostalgia. But I will say this key theme of like I'm not a gun, I think works really well. I mean, for me, that's the standout part of the Iron Giant. And I will say, whereas for you, that works better in Lilo and Stitch, for me, that works better here than it does in Bumblebee, where I think Bumblebee sells the relationship better, but I'm bothered by the goal that you want to get to is secretly I'm a badass alien warrior and I'm going to embrace that, right? Well, that kind of undermines, the whole thing. Here, it's much more consistent. I don't know how this AI works that when this alien, these alien war machines you built that are just like, hey, I never met a kid before. Now that I met a kid, war is really bad, isn't it? All I needed was a kid to tell me guns kill.
Yeah, well, I do you know what? It's now you're saying it. You've just said that. Like, where does this come from? Because we mentioned about E.T. and the relationship with Elliot, but E.T. is not an intergalactic killing machine. In fact, he's the exact opposite. Like, he is designed to heal. Like he's a
pudgy little alien who can barely move.
Yeah, and he's designed to heal. Like that, his finger heals. Like he is a healing being. And then you have like Mac and Me, which is just a pile of Play-Doh that is just a terrible film. But this idea of a boy and his dog, a boy and his alien, a boy and his robot, the film that sort of you've just said then about what makes them change. Terminator 2. This idea of sort of like the John Connor having that conversation with the T-800 where he's like, you can't go around killing people. He's like, why not? And he's like, you just can't. It's that thing of saying like, look, and he injures, and they get to the thing, and he injures the guy. He's like, he'll live. But there is that thing of like they express it in Terminator 2, and again, we've actually, or off air, we were talking about James Cameron and his films. But this idea of like, they acknowledge that he's a learning computer. Like the Terminator's a learning computer. It has to blend in with society, and this time it's been programmed to follow the lead of John Connor. And so, but that has a payoff. Like there's it's sacrifice. Not only did it sacrifice itself at the end, the sacrifice of the T-800 may be actually more impactful to me than the I ain't gonna lie, like that when when he lowers him, it gets Sarah Connor to lower him into the molten metal. Yeah, it gets me every time. But more than that, when he's at Cyberdyne and he kicks out the window and he's got the minigun and he's shooting at all the police and he's like ensuring that there is zero casualties. Like that film has a consistent message of like, yeah, you don't have to kill people like just because you're a weapon. Like that's the point. And then so it carries forward to Bumblebee and the Iron Giant and even Lilo and Stitch. And I'm going like, yeah, there is this notion, but you need to have you need for them to feel lethal to begin with. And what I'm sort of thinking is when you look at like Terminator 2, you've had the Terminator, but you also have the beginning, the fear of Sarah Connor, all that sort of thing. Bumblebee, you have the opening scene on Cybertron that shows Bumblebee being a badass and all this other stuff.
Well, then you land on Earth, and Bumblebee, the reason why he's messed up is because he's had this really vicious fight on a mountain. Right?
Exactly, yeah. So you've seen him in combat. And then the same with Lilo and Stitch. Like you see Stitch do all this stuff in space as to why he escapes and why he's such a menace. So when he comes to Earth, you've got that thing of the kid playing with this thing is a problem. Like you're like,
right,
the kid playing with this thing is not a good idea. And then it gives it a level of humanity in inverted commas. But you don't get that with the Iron Giant. You just sort of like, cool, it's a big plaything, and then you get the lethality. Then really, I suppose you should have that. You should almost be, as a viewer, you should be Kent Manley going like, no, this thing is dangerous. Like we do not want to keep playing with this.
And I kind of feel that a little bit from the beginning. I mean, with a kid playing with the electricity, I'm worried for him, right? I mean, there was a brilliant episode of the Marvel Transformers comic that took me years to really fully appreciate. That I think it was issue 13, in which Megatron has been basically defeated, but this is the G1 Megatron who turns into a handgun. Okay, the size of a regular handgun, and this guy who's kind of, just kind of like down on his luck, sort of like emasculated, kind of, I think he's a comic, finds this gun, and this gun basically like can never miss, and the gun doesn't know that he's Megatron, and the gun, he uses this to like become a gangster and kind of live out his fantasies, but this whole time you're very much aware, like, oh, you are playing with Megatron. Like, this is not, you are in danger. Like, and especially for the 50s, like there is and I know we do this. I don't want to be that guy, but I mean, there is a version of this movie in which we're aware of that danger from the beginning. And that ties into like 50s childhoods. I mean, you and I played on the street as kids, we were not supervised all the time, but this kid is really not supervised. And it could play into that where you're like, okay, the 50s weren't all great. This is dangerous. Here he is befriending in the woods. And I mean, I went through the woods unsupervised. I got into literally nearly died several times. It was all in a day's fun.
Yeah.
But I mean, I could see that working much better. But like you said, I mean, thinking about the Terminator films, and part of what I love about Terminator Genesis, and which they try to do a version of in Dark Fate, is the Terminator as somebody who's given up on killing, right? Who can resume it, but who's given up on that. And I know that works less for you than it does for me, but I love that stuff. I mean, so I really like this key idea. It just feels like it's not sold to me in quite the right way. And maybe you're right that it needs that sequence. I need to be scared for that kid. I need to.
Well, it's almost, if you're to expand upon this, like this is that thing of, it's almost like the action movie cliche. You know, in order for you to feel, it gives you that baseline. In order for you to feel a threat to the hero, right, as a badass or whatever, you need to see them being a badass. Right? You need to see them doing the thing they do, so that when they are taken out by the enemy, you go, oh well, they're a badass, but they're an even bigger badass. Like, they're all of a sudden the hero's an underdog, and that's crazy. And that's where you get films like at the start of, Dirty Harry does this routinely. Like, the start of the film is him taking out bad guys, and sort of like, do you feel lucky, punk? So you know who he is, and then it's him up against the villain. Is the same thing you have with all these other things. You need to know, you need to get the parameters of what this thing is pretty early on, so that you know where you are as the viewer to go, that's the situation, that's the relationship, and that's the journey that this relationship's going on. But because I think the robot has an element of amnesia, you're supposed to be like shocked by this thing, as to go, oh, it's a war machine. Like, but they go, yeah. Still, even if it wasn't a war machine, it's still a 50-foot robot that could do some pretty heavy damage. But you need to be sort of establishing something. So I do agree. There's like a section missing from the start of this film. Whatever that dream sequence is, you almost need it beforehand. You need the origin to be able to establish that Hogarth playing with this thing is not a good idea.
Yeah, I mean, I do think that would add a dynamic. I mean, I do understand the urge to kind of have it be a revelation, like, oh shit, that is a war machine. And they certainly want that revelation, especially in the way that he transforms.
Yeah.
And I see that transformation, and I'm like, I don't know where these parts were. Underneath your chest, like, there's
I'm cool with
a lot
that.
of machinery there.
I'm cool with that. Having grown up with Transformers Gen 1 and stuff, I'm fine with that. It's cool. It's an animation thing.
Yeah, I mean, I'm okay with it. I just, I don't know. I mean, it does seem sort of sudden, and I don't know. It just seems like, for me, nothing falls flat, but nothing quite works either for me in this film. Even early on with the government guy and his car being eaten, that's a sense of threat, right? Like, haha. But you see the Iron Giant like 5 feet away from him, and he doesn't see him. And it's like, that's supposed to be funny. It's supposed to be.
That's the one thing. No, I know what you're saying, because one of the things. No,
is that
and I
a
said
good
that is one.
gag?
No, that's one of the ones that does sort of fall flat, because there's also, because he has his car's been bitten into, like he's been partly eaten, fine. But so was, like, you see that Dean is buying a tractor at some point for scrap metal, and he's like, look, I'd give you more, but it's got a bite mark in it. Like, there doesn't seem to be any mystery in the town that's going like, we had this massive electrical outage, I've now got like half my tractors missing. Like, it feels like there's people just seem to be accepting stuff a little bit too easily. We're going, well, that's weird, I'll sell it for scrap. Like, there should be other people around the town going like, these things keep happening, what is going on? It shouldn't just be Kent Manley sort of like being the kook that
Well, not only that, I mean, I watched that scene and I had the same thought, and I was like, well, you're calling it a bite, right? Like, and it doesn't show teeth. It's not like you see like, oh no, there's a Tyrannosaurus Rex loose in LA, and you see like, oh, there's teeth marks, right? Like, you don't see robotic teeth marks. I thought, oh, okay, maybe bite means there's a chunk missing.
Yeah, but if you woke up in the morning,
scenes where there's stuff that's like, there's a grain silo, and there's a missing bite out of the top of a grain silo, and you see, no, clearly this is something that's happening all over town.
Exactly.
They all know.
Yeah,
there are bites out of things.
Yeah. What it is, yeah, I agree with that. There should be more, because again, this whole thing plays out, and again, they're playing it for time. we see that Dean is slightly ostracized from the town, and they introduce the military and stuff. And I think they have a missed opportunity here. And again, it's quite kind of cliche, but when it comes to the end of the film, and I think is it like Hogarth is falling from something, and I forget. There's like basically the Iron Giant saves somebody in town, and all the people come out and they're like, "Oh my god, he saved them!" Oh, and they're all accepting like really quickly. Like there's no one going, oh, that explains all the cars that have been bitten. I'm still really uncomfortable. Like they need someone, and because Kent Manley, the G man, is still the one going like, no, it needs to be destroyed. No, it needs to be destroyed, because that's the point at which the military turn back and start firing on it. You need people in the town, and this is again like this is sort of, you've seen it in storytelling, like everything from like Beauty and the Beast through to whatever else. You need more people going like, and usually it's the older conservative sort of contingent of the population going like, what the hell is going on? We don't know where this thing has come from. I don't trust it. It could be Russian. It could be this. It could be that. Like they should be siding with the army and saying, save our town. But none of that seems to happen either. Like the town just seems
Frankenstein thing, right?
Exactly.
Of
yes.
the town with pitchforks going like, "Oh, you're terrible," and then the kid is the one who's siding. And again, then it becomes like a Red Scare metaphor, right? Like the kid is siding with the underdog, with the alien against the popular pressure, right? Then it's got a whole different dynamic.
Yeah, I think that's the thing. It needs that dynamic for you to feel a more against, more towards, or whatever the robot. Because at the end of the film, like one of the things I was kind of weirded out with, the military turn up and start firing at it, and the people scatter, but everyone seems sort of more concerned about that. And obviously, when it turns into the robot or turns into the war machine, there's obviously that. But like the townsfolk are really sort of just background. Literal background characters. Like they do not, there is no real interaction with the rest of the story, and I definitely feel like you need that to give them a voice to be like, this thing's in like in our town now, like what is it? And I think that's what kind of missing for that final confrontation where Hogarth is, like I say, is defending the robot.
Well, going back to the Red Scare, right? Like, they should be scared of the commies, right? Like, I mean, if anything, you should have a townsperson playing that role instead of the government agent. I mean, who has seen enough to know, like, he says, I don't know what it is, but we can't take the risk. And then he's, obviously, very gung ho. But there should be a townsperson who says, I mean, we don't want some commie, robot in our town, right? This is a danger. But I mean, to me, this is a side effect of all of the characters seem, sort of two-dimensional. I mean, to me, that beatnik, the beatnik is kind of, I don't really care about him. I don't know why he's sculpting these, like, I know I'm supposed to identify with him as the countercultural outsider, and that's my thing, right? I should, but he's not really. I mean, he's not really a victim of the town. He seems to be totally embraced by the town. There's no 50s, conformity going on here. And, he is not sure if he wants to run a business selling junk, which we never see him make any money from, or be a sculptor of metal of these weird designs, and he talks about being an artist, which is kind of cool, but like, I don't understand how this really works. And it seems to me that if they were just a little braver, they could have had the mother be discriminated against because she's a single mother. And, people, maybe those kids say, it doesn't have to be like Rorschach, the origin, but they could say, hey, whore son, hey,
Or
where's your daddy?
Exactly. That's what I was going to say. Like, where's your father? That sort of thing. That should be
the Iron Giant could be a surrogate father, right?
A bit like the
I
T
mean,
eight,
this is
a bit like
obvious,
the
right?
T, yeah, like the T-800 for Sean Conner. Like
That's
it's
right.
you
Yeah,
know,
like I'm in the woods, and there's things that I can teach him, and we can, hey, look at my comic books. That's such a classic scene, right?
mm,
But instead, it's like with the person suffering with amnesia, there's no emotional resonance. And you're right. I mean, T2 has more of that.
yeah. And I think that's the thing is sort of like it's almost told in shorthand. And I think the thing is, one of the things I find that this film isn't brave enough to do that I think maybe a Disney film or some other animation would have been is to completely have those levels of ostracization where you have got like the beatnik is completely outside of town and considered to be the kook, and no one really talks to him apart from maybe like one or two farmers or something that sort of they deal with him because they can get parts off him or whatever.
Mm.
And the same for the mom. Like it never feels like, because again it has there's an awful sort of like tag on scene at the end of this where it suggests that the mum and the beatnik have got together, and I'm just like, yeah, they never feel like they should be together. Like they don't feel like a couple in the slightest, which is weird. And so there's, and obviously like, at the end of it, like the group has now accepted Hogarth, and he's sort of roughhousing with them, and I'm just like, hang on, like it's all too easy, that end bit. And so that's again where it feels like the characters are a little inconsistent.
Don't you think that that's part and parcel of the movie in general, though, right? Like you were pointing out that they don't treat the beatnik poorly. They don't treat the single mother poorly.
Yeah, I agree, and that sort of thing I think is missing. Where I think it's an opportunity missed. Where I think other animation houses would have done that, would have probably gone to that point. And what's weird is just to sort of look at the history of this period of animation. Like it's not like there were others that didn't do this. Like if you go back to some of the Don Bluth films, like if you look at like and this is an American Tale with Fievel the Bloody Mouse. That thing's all about like the immigrant story and has all kinds of like characters being treated awfully because of their race and all this other stuff. Like that really goes.
Amen.
And so we've had like Watership Down and the Secret of Nim. Like the stories that have gone really dark and done things. This film doesn't want to tap into that darker element of some of these sci-fi stories. It's not darker; it's just more of a sort of political or a social statement. Doesn't really want to do that, and I think it's lesser because of it. And so I agree with that. However, you said this is that thing of saying you've seen it in small chunks, and so the whole is less than the sum of its parts. For me, though, it's the exact opposite in the sense of like I'm nitpicking and I'm picking at these parts. However, when I put it all together as an Iron Giant, like it works. I get carried along. I sort of like I have a level of investment in it that I'm enjoying it as an animation. I like the design elements throughout. I think the Iron Giant looks great. I love the fact they sort of stripped it back to this sort of this 50s design of sort of very sort of like bare bones. However, when he becomes the War Machine, the things that come out his back in particular, there's like two snake-like things that are very reminiscent of that are very reminiscent of War of the Worlds. And these other elements, I'm like, I'm digging all this to say like, this has got stuff I'm loving. So it's all sort of coming together as a whole rather than the smaller pieces.
Yeah, I mean that's fascinating, and one of the things that I find most surprising in my life is every time that I have an impression, I second guess it, right? And I think like, well, maybe if I had watched this at the time, maybe if my first impression of this movie were watching it all the way through, right, I would have a different idea of it. Every time I'm able to test this, like, I mean, I watch a movie on cable in little pieces or, on the internet in little pieces, and I think this is confusing. This must be my fault. I mean, every time I'm able to test this, it's never the case, right? So I mean, I don't hate this movie. I mean, I think it's a fine movie. I don't think it's bad by any means, but it does not wow me. It doesn't have that movie magic that it does for you. And I'm perplexed by why that is the case.
I do wonder if this is one of those films, as you say, that like if you come at it at a certain time. Like I saw this in the cinema. Like I remember seeing this. I was in 99 or 17. So it's like I wasn't like a kid, but like I remember seeing this in the cinema going, I want to see that. That seems kind of cool. And going to see it and enjoying it enough that it's become part of that sort of that period. But like I say, I think if I was to go on IMDb or like I say Rotten Tomatoes or Letterboxd, whatever, and you were to look at the age of some of the people that have reviewed this, I can imagine that they were probably in their, I don't know, 8 to 15, maybe 8 to 12 age range when this came out. That really hit the sweet spot of this now has been a formative film in the same way that sort of like there are animation films like we were really sort of like gave a lot of praise to Transformers 86 and I think it deserves a lot of it, but I think if you were to sort of if there was a generation older than us that came into it, well, I watched that when I was in my 20s and I think it's a pile of crap. Like I think there is that sweet spot of where these things hit. And I think that does form part of it. I think this sort of film leans into the nostalgia of the 50s, which I think appeals to certain Americana. But then I think it also hit. I mean, don't forget, this film wasn't a big success. Like this has found its feet since. And so I think all the criticism is fair. I think it's more a case of this film just found its feet as a cult film that people have sort of like latched onto. But you're right. I think there's just elements of it that for me that work, that sort of like they work or don't work in other films. Like it's not this film is not original. I'll concede that. Like it's not like going, oh, this is wowing me because all the concepts are new. Oh no, it's loaded with cliches. It just, I don't know, for some reason it just seems to work. It sort of melds quite well for me. Not that this isn't the best animated film, but yeah, I do think it sort of works well.
Well, I mean, there's a lot that I like here. I like the animation style. I mean, I like the basic story. It's a touchstone for the boy and his robot kind of genre, right? Which is a story, an archetype that I adore, frankly. I will say that, maybe I'm, I don't know. I mean, I am bothered by his design. The thing that bothers me is the connection of the legs to the torso.
Oh,
and
okay.
I know this is so weird, but like I work with toys, right? So like to me, it's like, especially in the 50s, you would, for a blocky robot, you want something that doesn't have a a connector piece jutting out from a kind of crotch area, horizontally to connect with the legs. And there's a big one because, the first thing I think of is like, that is a breakage point. That's where the toy's going to
break.
Yeah. And so I see that and I'm like, I love the design except that. Okay, but obviously, I mean, that's such like, insider baseball kind of nonsense.
No, but you make a good point, because if you're the military and you're looking at this thing walking towards you, someone's got to go shoot at that midsection. That seems like a weak point.
Well, this is true. I mean, also you do see the military, their tactics are very strange. And you do see military people dying, and they're, just firing at it, and the shells are bouncing off and, sort of destroying things. And I'm wondering, like, yeah, when we saw people like bailing out of helicopters with parachutes in G.I. Joe, we knew that was a lie, right? Like, that guy's dead. This is a con. Did people watch this and know that was a lie? Like, were they outraged by it the way I was as a kid by G.I. Joe? Or
I don't think so. I don't think it's one of those sort of things. It just doesn't come up. So, yeah, no one sort of questions it.
Well, the thing about age is a key thing, and I mean, I was a little older, but I was charmed by my brother and I saw Nightmare Before Christmas a million times, and anything's, I see flaws in it all over the place, but I mean, I don't have a tattoo, but I love that movie. I talked to Gabriel, the closest thing I have to a son, sort of foster son, who said, I really am angry that you don't like the Iron Giant, because I grew up with that, even though he was younger.
Mm,
And, to him, that was something that he identified with as an outsider, um, growing up in Hawaii. And
yeah. I can see
maybe
that.
it
I
is
mean, it's one of
generational.
those. I think it is a generational thing because I do think, like you say, it's where you come across it. Like I saw it in the cinema, but like I've seen it on TV. This thing I can imagine being on reruns repeatedly. So yeah, I can see why it could touch a generation, much in the same way. To me, I loved Goonies when I was a kid, right? And I would say Goonies is a great film. However, I know people both younger than me and older than me that think it's a pile of crap. Really dislike it. But that film was a massive pop culture sort of staple in the 80s. And it hit me just spot on. It's an 80s sort of like, kids' adventure film. It's got pirates, it's got sort of hidden treasure, blah, blah, blah. Like it's under this thing's under your feet. It's all there. And I can see why it hits like a zeitgeist with certain kids. But I go back and I've watched it as an adult and I've gone like, yeah, there's all kinds of problems with this film. Like this film has got massive problems, but I still watch it and go, I don't care. I still love it. Like I still love Data doing all this stuff. Like I can see why it becomes a thing. So when the people sort of start pointing out those flaws, you're like, no, screw you. This film's amazing. So I understand that sort of point. But yeah, there is something else I want to sort of touch on about this, which is interesting, which is sci-fi in animation. And we've obviously covered Akira before. We've met, and there was other sort of like this period. There was a lot of like Japanese anime. You've got Ghost in the Shell, and other things are sort of like it works over there. Like you can go and do deeper themes, and it's all like adult animation stuff. What's interesting around this period is we had this was 1999, and it seems to trigger sort of like a sci-fi animation mini unsuccessful boom, because after this you have Titan AE done by Universal. You then get Atlantis, The Lost Empire by Disney. You get Treasure Planet. You get Lilo and Stitch. And there was another one I was thinking of. I can't remember now. But like, there's this sort of like couple of years where all of a sudden they're like, oh, animation and sci-fi, and they all sort of fall under the radar. Like not one of them really sort of landed. And I find it's interesting that like, is it because they're bad films? I haven't gone back. I really like Lilo and Stitch, but like I've heard other people going like Atlantis is really good. The Lost Empire is really. I've watched that recently. Not bad. I haven't watched Treasure Planet, but like I don't know. It's interesting.
I really want to rewatch that. Yeah,
it's interesting how they tried. I mean, Titan AE was 2000. Atlantis was 2001. Treasure Planet 2002.
Atlantis, The Lost Empire, the Disney film.
Yeah.
Never saw that.
I mean, they're interesting. They're worth seeing, but it's interesting how there's this sort of mini boom of sci-fi animation that just sort of dies a death after like 3 years. But now we seem to be coming through a generation, that generation that did go that sort of 20 years later. Those people that did watch those are now coming into the industry and that sort of thing. And I am hearing more and more people saying, oh no, I loved Atlantis, The Lost Empire and Treasure Planet. And so they're a missed classic. And I can't move in certain shops now for images of Stitch. Like I literally went into a shop in town the other week and there was all Stitch goods. And it wasn't a Disney store, it was just a store. And there's like so it's interesting how, like we say about nostalgia, like you said, that the Iron Giant appeared in Ready Player One. This film, this sort of late 90s, early 2000s, is now becoming a nostalgia period that I think is beginning to have that come through. Those kids that enjoyed it then are coming through now, and it may not have been a success then, but I do think that those films are going to have an influence in the near future.
Well, I mean, while you've been talking, I've looked all this stuff up on Wikipedia, and what is fascinating to me is that I was the biggest sci-fi nerd, and I never watched any of those movies. never watched them. Was very dimly aware of them, and to the extent that I thought that they were probably for kids or, you know, silly or what have you. Um, you know, and I just could not fathom who was watching this. Um, and I wonder if that was true of the Iron Giant too.
Mm.
I don't know. Um, you know, maybe I was just aged out already of this whole thing. But I
Uh,
mean, we
Quite
obviously we
possibly.
need to go back and watch all of these.
Yeah. Well, I'm just looking at Titan AE, which is one I think we should do, because Titan AE is an interesting one as to whether or not it's any good or not. But it's, you know, it's a sort of a transition between 2D and CG animation. But your cast, it's like you got Matt Damon, Drew Barrymore, Bill Pullman, Nathan Lane, John Leguizamo. Like they're not massive names, but like when some of the other ones are. But like, yeah, it really was going for it at the time, and so I do. I'm curious to see sort of like, you know, if they do start to have that impact on more modern pop culture. Like, I'd like to go back and I think we should do a couple of them. I think in future seasons, just see how we feel about them, and let's say, had we aged out of them at that time?
Well, you know, I mean, I don't think I was consciously aware that Treasure Planet existed until I saw design work a year or two ago of it, and I thought, what am I looking at? This looks amazing. How do I not know about this? And you know, and then I looked at it, and you know, I haven't watched it, but the design work is staggering. And Lilo and Stitch, I mean, you know, I see plushes of them everywhere. I see, you know, but this is this whole like weird sort of like memory hold aspect of science fiction and science fiction animation that you know, is sort of primed for a comeback. But you know, it's interesting that the Iron Giant kind of has survived that and is beloved, and Lilo and Stitch too, because I think it's too cutesy not to, you know,
Yeah.
get that Disney memory. But Treasure Planet, nobody knows that exists, right? I mean,
Well,
it's Disney, but nobody
no.
knows outside of like a $300 figurine or something.
Yeah.
Collect.
It's one of those interesting ones that, like you say, why does you mentioned toys, right? I would say that Iron Giant is I can't say the bloody word now. It's the starting point. Right? It kicked off this thing. I mean, again, don't forget, 99 is one of those years. Is an odd year, whatnot. It's a seminal year in cinema. Like, you've got a lot of big films that year. You know, Fight Club, Matrix, whole bunch of sort of big films. But also, more than that, anyone that's seen it, and although you've said Iron Giant as a toy concept, you've got like a breaking point. Like, I've seen Iron Giant toys, like, and I remember them from when I was a kid, those early 2000s. Like, you could buy the Iron Giant. They weren't massive, but I remember like a McDonald's tie-in and all kinds of things. Like, this had toy-based legs, where even now, like, that Iron Giant image is toyetic. Like, you can do something with it. And the same with
that
Stitch.
term means something.
Yeah.
Right.
And then so the same with Stitch. Like, yeah, we have 2 Stitch plushies in this house, right? That my daughter has, right? And one of them was mine that she had, and then one of them was like a sleeping Stitch that she loves. She uses it as a pillow. So that thing has become.
I love you so much, Scott. Like, I couldn't even recognize them out of a lineup, but I identify with this so much.
But you know, so that again, there's the reason that Lilo and Stitch, the reason also Lilo and Stitch was during a peak when Elvis was making a bit of a sort of a resurgence, and the whole soundtrack is based around Elvis music. It mentions like Blue Hawaii and all this other stuff. So it fits into that. It's got that sort of legs and that legacy because of those elements. There is nothing, well, there would be if you really wanted to, but there's nothing plushy or nothing sort of toyetic really within Treasure Planet and Atlantis and even Titan AE. They are out and out sci-fi stories. And so I think what happened was, like, you get to a point where you're like, yeah, we can't really make toys of this. You can't really make there's nothing really to follow on from. Like, you could have computer games and stuff, but this is obviously, these came out in a period when you're moving from Mega Drives to PlayStation, games were changing. They
Mhm.
fell through the cracks because they had nothing to grab onto. I have a weird feeling as well. I'm just going to check it now, see if I can find it. Titan AE had a soundtrack, and I've got a feeling like it was like Nickelback or someone else like that
Mm.
did some music
A
for it.
big deal at the time.
Yeah, and I remember certain songs being being on the radio
Yeah, I
quite a
mean,
lot and stuff. But other than that, like there was the songs probably had more legs than the film. And so I do find that there's this
yeah, they had like 11 tracks by various contemporary rock bands,
yeah.
you know. Yeah, all of which were kind of like of the moment, like are not remembered well.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, yeah. You're not going to find them on a sort of like an now that's what I call album. Like now that's what I
Yeah.
call forgotten sci-fi films. Um, yeah,
Well, I
it's
was reading an interesting thing about like this period from sort of like the mid 2000s to the early 2010s, of sort of popular music that just has all disappeared,
mm,
never referenced, never in TV shows, never include, and it's all stuff that I'm like, I have no idea what you're talking about. And people who grew up there are just like, in that era. I mean, if you were a teenager in 2005 or 2008, you had these MP3s, right?
mm,
And these stories talk about that, and yet nobody outside of that era knows that exists. And here is this weird kind of like, it was a little younger than my age, this kind of like sci-fi animated block that has been sort of memory hold.
mm.
And I find this fascinating, this weird way in which we like to think that everything is a goddamn meritocracy, right? And stuff that survives because it's better, right? It's
Mm,
not always true.
mm.
Um, some of it's better. I mean, there's some truth to that, right? But there's also, like maybe the Iliad and the Odyssey, like those other Greek epics that were like part of the Trojan cycle, maybe they were like fucking amazing.
Yeah.
And they just got forgotten. And what we have is like, oh yeah, you got the Odyssey? Yeah. Oh man, that's
Mm.
second rate.
Yeah, it was all right. We like the Odyssey, but you really should read so and so. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
No, I think there's an element of that like again, I think it's about, especially with Disney. And I've just checked Disney Plus, Titan AE, and all the others are on there. They're all on because it was 20th Century Fox was Titan AE, so they obviously now own it.
Mhm.
Is that thing of like what gives these things legs? What makes them sort of stand out of the time of the moment? And I think when you look at those sort of the animation films that stand out, like again, like gives them legs. I remember as a kid watching Land Before Time, Watership Down, Secret of Nim, American Tail. Those films from the 80s, like, and that's not just Disney. Like don't forget, Disney was on its ass in the 80s. These are all very much sort of like Don Bluth and other animation studios. For the most part, they were the ones I was brought up on as a little kid. But there's nothing there like now, though, because those animation studios don't exist anymore. Like, you try and find American Tail on a streaming service now. Like, I wonder if it's
Not to
there.
mention American Tail 2, Five Goes West.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. Which I think is an underappreciated, gem. But I don't remember that much, but I remember this, I don't know who owns them, but like those films are, I don't want them to be lost to history, because I do think that they do something, in some cases, stand up better than some of the dreck that's come out of Disney.
Well, and it's funny how like, somewhere out there, that song, which, I mean, still tugs at my heartstrings. Everybody knows that, but nobody's watched the movie.
Yeah.
Right? Like, it's weird. These kind of scenes become iconic. And,
Yeah.
you know,
And it's funny because, like you say, for example, I would say Watership Down is one of those examples where I recently saw a thing online that said Watership Down should not be shown to kids. And I was like, really? It's a film that it horrified me as a child. Like it's a full on this, gave me possibly gave me nightmares. But like I still appreciated it and enjoyed it as a film, like because it was that thing. But there were, you got some real sort of horror elements in that. Like it's got the general wound war, and you've got the black rabbit of Inlay. I remember all this stuff. Like it's in my head. Like Hazel having a seizure and seeing the fields covered in blood. Like all that stuff, like is iconic to me. But they're going, oh no, kids can't see that now. I'm not saying I'm not trying to be about that. But what I'm saying is, we talked about the blandness of some of the characters in Iron Giant, and they're being, or they don't want to ostracize Dean too much or the mother too much. And I'm going like, well, is it playing it too safe then with some of these characters? Because we've had films that have done much, much more that have gone before, and I would say are iconic, but have also been slightly lost to history. I don't know. It just feels, it's not like it hasn't been done.
I mean, to me, it plays it too safe, but I'm coming at it with newer eyes, right? I mean, the flip side is maybe the reason why it is iconic and it is remembered and these others aren't is because it did play it safe. And, this isn't a Disney film, but isn't that the Disney strategy, right? There's a reason why, Disney is, has such a high success rate and everything feels so sort of test marketed. It tends to be remembered pretty well. I mean, those animated features notwithstanding, there's a reason why every, silly, Disney film has had a, live action remake in the last 5 years. I mean, and I see their work in the Marvel stuff, sort of. So maybe the reason why this is remembered is because it's sort of extra safe. And Watership Down. I mean, look, I was a kid watching The Silence of the Lambs and Ken Russell movies and stuff like that. I mean, what I don't understand about that, especially today, is. And this is a key point for me is that when we talk about kids and what's appropriate for children, always remember that whatever the hell you and I saw is nothing compared to what every kid today sees.
No, it's true.
And because they have this wonderful thing called the internet. And I remember, many, many years ago, too many to recollect without embarrassment, seeing my girlfriend's nieces and nephews who were younger than her, and they were on the internet, and I sort of clearly interrupted them, and we're talking like 8 to 12, and I clearly interrupted them on a cell phone, and they were like, "Oh shit, my older, sister, whatever, boyfriend is here," and they were all gathered around Two Girls, One Cup.
Okay.
8 to 12.
Yeah.
And that was the moment where I realized, all right, I need to let go of any of my Puritan, feelings about childhood, right? Like, right. Oh, that makes sense. They have the internet. Right. Yeah.
Yeah. All that is gone. Childhood lost. Innocence lost, as it were. Yeah, I think you're right. I think they do have the access to specific things, and maybe you're right. Maybe that's the thing is, sometimes I think because there is a, that generation, those people that were kids, that 8 to 12 age when the Iron Giant came out and stuff, and they did see Treasure Planet and all those other films. They're probably the last sort of part of a generation to have these sorts of films fed to them, and through a mechanism that they didn't have free control over. In that late 90s, early 2000s, it was still DVDs. You didn't have Blu-rays yet, but there was no internet. Was not that. You were still kicking about on a bloody modem in your house. Broadband wasn't really a thing. I don't know when broadband came in, but I don't remember it being that much of a thing then. And you definitely didn't have streaming and YouTube and stuff. So yeah, you may be right. There's a difference between, like, I could show a kid now. I wouldn't show, well, they're different kinds of kids, because I think, Ellie doesn't. She has YouTube and stuff, but doesn't have access to those kind of things. At least I'm aware of. But I think you're right. There's groups of kids that I could show, like, Watership Down to and go like, this traumatized me as a child, and they'd be like, really? I've seen actual footage of rabbits being tested on, like, this is disgusting. And you're going like, oh, okay. Yeah. It's a different childhood experience. Like, you are slightly apart from my life experience. You're probably right. But then that makes me wonder, how do genre kids films, how do they land? Is that why, something like Wednesday or Stranger Things, which is darker and has an edge, is actually more popular with younger kids today than it would have been? I mean, if one of those came out and they were marked as a 12 or a 15, and you would have watched it earlier, but it wouldn't have been. It would have been more, secret. Oh, I got to watch Stranger Things, not sort of like a 5-year-old walking to school with a Stranger Things bag on his back or something, like, Yeah. I don't know. I think that's part of it. And I think, like, say, Iron Giant maybe sort of forms that a break in that thing of innocence of being a kid. And, that's sort of the idea of a boy and his robot.
Well, it definitely has that. And I think that's charming, especially from its animation style. But again, I think that even older movies are kind of less innocent in their depictions, right? Like, I mean, the depiction of the military is interesting. The military is kind of like oddly redeemed by showing that the main character is a warmonger, right? Who's ready to nuke a civilian area without thought and then to flee. Okay. Well, I mean, how do you put that up against, like, Doctor Strangelove, right? It's like, this is actually a very pro-military version compared to that, right? I mean, this guy is an outlier. How does he exist within that establishment? How has nobody spotted this sooner? I mean, he's not even a consistent, as you pointed out, I think, character from start to finish, right?
No. The military internationally, there's two things from the military, because you are 100% right. The general sort of, like, he's not the warmonger. Like, you expect the general is usually the one that's like, kill it with fire kind of thing. But he's not in this. But there's two parts of that, like, that make me that again, it's a kids' film, so I'm not so bothered by it. It's a nitpick. After everything that happens, and they've got, like, a warship off the coast that's just fine. I assume it's supposed to be a nuke, right? And I'm going to get to that in a second. And then the Iron Giant shoots up, destroys it, and it's blasted. All the general says is, let's go home. And I'm like, no. You've just shot up a small town. You have a warship off the coast. You have got to bring in somebody to debrief these people. Like, you need to have a base here for at least a couple of weeks to try and calm the situation down. You don't just roll out, like, there's shells and stuff everywhere. Like, no. Like, this is not how it's done. And the second point is, even if the Iron Giant did prevent, in fact, if anything, the Iron Giant made things worse. All right, hear me out. If that is a nuclear weapon that he has decimated, instead of it hitting the town and covering off a area of, you'd have got a Hiroshima Nagasaki situation. He detonates it in the atmosphere. You've now got radiation raining down over a much larger area.
Yeah, an area the size of Europe.
Yeah. They've just taken out North America.
Yeah, I mean, presumably not with that. I mean, depends the kilotons of the explosion.
No, still.
But I mean, I mean, there is. I had the same thought, right? Like, I mean, this is. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, this is sort of from an era in which you could depict that. Certainly in the 80s, right? You could have, like, a nuclear explosion in the atmosphere, and it was like, oh, good, it didn't hit anyone. Like, it's so naive, right? Like, no, the planet's fucked anyway, right?
Yeah. I enjoy
the same
too.
thought.
Yeah, I enjoy it until they come back and Hogarth's no longer got any hair, suffering from radiation sickness. The town's
Iron Giant
decimated.
2,
Yeah.
the fallout.
Yeah,
Right?
exactly. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
the Iron Giant has reassembled himself at the end, and he's just distributing water for the whole movie.
Just tending to a sick Hogarth who's dying of cancer.
Yeah, that's a little morbid even for me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's like you say, it's a nitpick, and it's like you say, they can get away with it in this kind of film. I think the point is there. But yeah, no, I think the point is overall, I think I would go back and watch this film, and I enjoy it. I think it's a worthy, if anything, like it opens up a channel for me to go, there are more animated sci-fi films I think I should go back and look at. And I do think I am going to go back and watch Treasure Planet, Titan AE, and some of the others, and see if they do sort of not so much stand up, but are they good for the time, or do they have anything to offer? Maybe we should sort of watch them at some of the point in the future. It'd be interesting.
Well, I like that idea. The only difference is I'm not going to go back and watch them. I want you to force me to go back and watch them so that we can record a podcast about each and every one of them.
Season 5, Titan AE. I think that would be because that's the one that's interests me. We shall see. Right. Anyway, we are sort of coming to the end for that one. So, any final thoughts or anything else on The Iron Giant of 1999?
I mean, I feel like I've been really mean, or tough, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I still like this. I still think I think it's fine. I think it's, somewhere between fine and good, right? I don't think it's bad. I don't, it doesn't offend me. It just never quite clicks the way I want it to. But that doesn't mean that I also respect its place in history. I respect how influential it's been.
Yeah.
It is a touchstone, and it's a touchstone for a reason. So, I'm glad to be forced to watch it all the way through, and I look forward to being forced to watch this other batch of animation all the way through. What about you?
No, it does still have that place of I enjoy it. I think it's I like it for many reasons. I think they say the animation stands out. I miss movie quality 2D animation. I think there is something there. There's some parts of the film work better than others. I agree. I think the film could do with being 10 minutes longer and just adding in some of the things we talked about, just to give you a bit of an idea of things. And I do think it plays it a little safe. But as a kid's film, I think it works. I enjoy it. I think the sentiment is the intent of the whole Superman thing. I'm not a gun. Works well. I think it works and it's great. I love the design. I think one of the things that's interesting is this idea of the sentience of the Iron Giant. That they talk about having a soul. He's what this idea from Hogarth. It's sort of well, you think and you feel, and so that gives you a soul, and that means you're not just you have a choice. You are a being. You're not just a machine. And again, that's an interesting point there of sort of what it is. It's not explored in much more than that one small scene, which is I think because then it becomes this idea of a lot more simple of I am not a gun, which I think they try and make it a bit more straightforward. But yeah, they do have this idea of he's not just he's the Iron Giant. They refer to him as a robot in the film a few times, but it's this idea of what makes him sentient. Does he have a choice? He clearly has a response as a sort of he sees Hogarth with the gun, or he gets fired upon by the military, and they keep using the word it triggers something, it's triggered, he has someone with an anger management problem, you've triggered him. He's triggered to have a response, yet he also is able to make choices and chooses not to pull the final trigger, if you will, like to do the final, to kill everybody off, as is clearly his purpose. And so I like that actually they introduce this idea that he you don't see his side, he hasn't got a brain, I don't know what he is, but he has something more, and he actually learns to talk more. Like, again, we've talked about this idea of sort of learning, he starts to talk a bit more, and you have the thespian skills of Vin Diesel providing the voice, clearly reaching the edges of his of his acting talent as a voice actor. So no, I think it's got lots of things in it that I think work really well, and I like and touch on things. I just think I see why this failed. I can see in its element why this didn't hit a zeitgeist at the time, but acts as almost like a cult nostalgia film for those that did see it. So yeah, that's sort of where I am with it. Sort of like, if it works for me, I'll watch it again. I would definitely watch it again.
I wonder if I can real quickly make a point. Like, how effective is the Iron Giant at killing? Because it seems to me he is totally trying to kill the kid. He blasts him twice, and then he is in full military mode. Like, clearly has an arsenal capable of decimating that town, and is totally not in himself. Right? He's like hypnotized until the kid comes to him and says, "You're not a gun," and you see his eyes change. The Iron Giant's eyes change. Is he just a really bad war machine? Is that kind of
he's like Stormtrooper level bad. Like he misses routinely. I don't know, because what that is interesting, because he marches through the town, doesn't he? And like, you see him march after the military with all his guns out. Like, his arms are now guns. He's got those sort of like tentacle guns over his shoulders, and he is firing. But when you see the town at that point, the animation, the backdrop of the town, like, there's no damage. It's not like half of Main Street is now in rubble, and
thousands are dead.
Yeah. All that the Jones family that lived above the local shop have been like decimated and stuff. Like, again, this is that thing about playing it safe, isn't it? They don't want to show that the rampage of this robot has done serious damage, and I wonder if it's about making it redeemable. I've thought about this with this thing about I'm writing something at the moment about, I'm getting to my Moon Knight. I'm finally getting sort of like, after everything, finishing off my Moon Knight essay. But this idea of how superheroes are sort of like, they have to keep them on the right side of redeemable. Like, you can always push a character so far, but you need to keep them redeemable, and you can get away with more with certain characters like Wolverine or whatever. But you need to keep a character redeemable. And like I say, if the Iron Giant has literally come up and proved Kurt Manley's point that he is dangerous and will kill people by showing this sort of swath of destruction behind him, like, then he's no longer redeemable, and Hogarth is wrong.
Mm-hmm. Well, or he's programmed to do something terrible, but Hogarth has seen, a soul somewhere inside there. I mean, or at least some sort of, I don't know the soul stuff, I don't know what to think about that, but, has seen something inside there, right, that is redeemable, but is trapped in his programming, right? I mean, I think we're all trapped in our programming.
But
I can see that, but that's more interesting. That's more challenging, right?
It is, exactly. Yeah, but this isn't a challenging film, is it? As you've said, they're trying to play it safe. That would be more interesting if you were trying to have this thing redeemed as, yes, he's destroyed half the town and killed hundreds of people, but he didn't destroy the warship and he saved us from a nuclear weapon. Like, could they build a statue of him? Don't forget, like, they in the town center at the end of the film, they have a bronze statue of the Iron Giant. Like, he didn't do something. So again, it could just be simple choices about how he only chooses to fire on determined military targets. This is what I mean. Like, if you want to show this thing's a war machine, if it's an all-out destruction machine, fine. But is it more nuanced than that? And you know, you could easily have a scene where it chooses not to shoot on some innocent people, unarmed people, you know,
or in the way, or
in the way, and steps over them, or just decides not to kill them and steps on and continues to fire at the military. Like, have that, like, something in there just to show, oh, actually, the military brought this upon themselves because of weapon, you know, violence begets violence, but innocence get in the way, sort of thing.
Well, and it comes close to that, right? You know, that they sort of trigger him, but right, you know, there isn't that. He seems either in a trance or recovered from the trance, in which he's like entirely peaceful. There's nothing in between, which is like, I'm capable of making discriminations. I'm going to step over these civilians and hit those guys. And that seems to, you know, make it more convenient at the same time less.
Yeah.
Well, I'm glad that they made a statue. I'm way less bothered by the you know, the couple being together, you know, at the end, that I am like the town going like, oh, we made a statue for you.
Yeah.
You're a hero. Yeah. That irritates me for some reason.
Yeah, well, because of that reason. I mean, you know, just as a final thought put on that, when we watched Godzilla, the 1954 Godzilla, one of the scenes that both you and I pointed out and resonated with us is that the woman protecting her children in the street, as like Tokyo burns around her and stuff, and it is insinuated that she's killed. Like it's suggested, sort of like rubble either falls on her or she's burnt alive. Like, and you go, oh, Godzilla is just killing everything in its path. Like, you know, Godzilla is a monster and it's to be stopped. You almost want to, if you're going to have a rampaging mechanical kaiju kind of situation, you need something similar that says, what is the, again, this is that thing about what are the parameters that this thing is working under. If it's Godzilla level where it is just destroying everything in its path, then yeah, you've got a problem. You need a similar situation of you know, a woman protecting her children, and it chooses not to do that to show that actually there's something there. This is a war machine, not a killing machine, sort of thing. I don't know. It would give you a bit more of a definition as to what the threat level is and why he is redeemable, and that Kurt Manley was wrong in saying, you know, him firing upon it and him doing everything is actually the one, you know, being the one that first pulls the trigger. You're the wrong person. You've got to ask the question, find out more, kind of thing. But it doesn't give you that to say we should think about that.
Yeah, well, you know, he was right, and you know, if the Iron Giant were alive, I'd want to, you know, cut his head off and put it in my den on the wall.
According to the end of the film, he is still alive, and he's to be found in a snowy wasteland somewhere. So we'll see.
Even that irritates me. No, I mean, I'm kidding. You know, I'm trying to be an ass, but you know.
I like the fact that the kid, because Hogarth says, "I'll see you soon," and it's like, no, you won't, because there's going to be no sequel to this film. Like it.
Right. There's not that the Iron Giant goes west.
Yes. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. Right. Anyway, so there. Any of the final thoughts with regards to the Iron Giant?
No, I mean, I it's good enough that I wish I liked it better. I want to like it better. And I apologize to the listeners for not liking it better.
We're going to get letters, as they were saying. Yeah, no, I do enjoy this film. It is probably going to be in my rotation. It's probably one I will go back and see at some point again. I do enjoy it a lot. I like everything. There's some good stuff about it. I do think it like I say, it's not as iconic as I think, but I think there are people younger than us that it sort of hit them at the right time. That I think it hits that nostalgia button, and for the right reasons. I think it works on that front. Anyway, there we are. We have talked about A Boy and His Robot, and in the next episode, we're going to be talking about some kids again. We're still keeping with the kiddie theme, but this is going to be some children and their island of death. That's right. We're going to be talking Battle Royale, the 2000s.
Now, see, this is a movie that I chose. And this is a movie that is up Julian's alley, that does not pull his punches. And you could say it's stupid, you could say it's violent, but, you know, there's no argument that this is a half-baked version of itself.
Oh, no, yeah. We will talk about some of the bits in the film. I'm not even going to try and spoil now because
No.
it's a fascinating film. But
Battle
yes,
Royale.
the next film is Battle Royale. Yes, not the Hunger Games, not your sanitized, young adult version. We're going all out, and we'll be talking about it on the next episode. But for now, ladies and gentlemen, if you like what we do, go and leave a review on your podcast catcher. We appreciate all feedback, and we do check our reviews. And also, if you like what you're doing even more, go and check out our Patreon. We're doing all kinds of things over there. If you like the Twilight Zone, trekking through the Twilight Zone, which has been now on the main feed. We're going through the first season on the main feed. We've got a full, well, pretty much, we're almost at the end of the third season now, going out on the Patreon. We've got almost 3 full seasons of us going through the original 1960s Twilight Zone, and there will be more. You've also got me giving my 30-minute thoughts, which is just me chatting about subjects chosen by the patrons. There's a whole bunch of other stuff on there as well, so go check it out. And actually, before even this, Julian and I were talking about other things we're going to be adding to the Patreon, some other bonus content related to the films that we're going to be covering on the main feed. So go check that out. There'll be a link down below. We appreciate all support.
Yeah, I love Scott's 30-minute thoughts. I learned so much from listening to them, and you will too. And we are, you've got countless hours, on the Patreon. So, and we really appreciate it. It's amazing how much, your £5, your £5 a month means to us, knowing that you're helping to keep the lights on, but also it's a big moral support.
It is. It keeps us doing what we're doing, and there'll be more stuff to come anyway. So, but anyway, Julian, thank you very much for talking Iron Giant. And ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for your support, and we shall see you on the next episode.